Officer Mark had been on the streets for years, and he knew most nights were quiet, ordinary, and sometimes even boring. The hum of his patrol car's engine and the flashing of the streetlights above were almost hypnotic, a rhythm he had grown used to. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. He drove slowly through the familiar streets of the city, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. People were rushing home, some walking dogs, some heading to late-night diners, while the occasional car sped past, unaware of the law that quietly observed them. Mark had learned long ago that even the smallest things could make a difference. A quick glance at a driver distracted by their phone could prevent an accident, a friendly word could calm someone having a bad day, and sometimes a simple traffic stop could change more than just the law, it could touch a life, though he did not yet know that this night would prove it in the most unexpected way. As he drove, he sipped his lukewarm coffee, enjoying the familiar comfort of routine. He liked knowing the city's rhythm, the way the night shifted from one street to another, the sounds of tires on wet asphalt after a sudden rain, the occasional siren in the distance that reminded him the world was unpredictable. Mark had seen plenty of things during his patrols, fender benders, lost pets, even people in desperate need of help, but he had never expected a routine night to leave such a deep mark on him. He reminded himself to stay alert, even when everything seemed calm. Routine was a trap in disguise. Just when you think nothing can happen, life had a way of surprising you. It was around 10 p.m., the city quieter than usual, the neon signs from shops casting colorful reflections on the wet streets from a light drizzle earlier. Mark's headlights cut through the darkness as he drove down one of the main roads, scanning for cars that might be speeding, swerving, or simply not paying attention. His training told him to look for even the smallest mistakes, because one wrong turn, 1 second of distraction, could lead to disaster. Tonight, though, there was something subtle in the air, a tension he couldn't quite put his finger on, something that told him this patrol would be different. Then he noticed a car ahead, its movement slightly uneven. It wasn't reckless driving, not yet, but it was enough to catch his attention. The car drifted a little to the right, then back into its lane, almost like it was hesitant, unsure. Mark's instincts kicked in immediately. This was his job, to notice what others didn't. Routine patrols were meant to keep the city safe, but they also had a hidden side, the possibility of moments that could change everything. He slowly began to follow the car, maintaining a safe distance, observing quietly. Sometimes the smallest details revealed the biggest stories. As he continued behind the vehicle, Mark couldn't help but think about how many similar nights he had spent driving, watching, waiting, and hoping that nothing serious would happen. Yet, deep down, he knew that life often had a way of intervening when you least expected it. Many nights passed without incident, but the quiet ones, the ordinary ones, often led to extraordinary moments. Mark had learned that it wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about connecting with people, understanding the lives hidden behind the steering wheels, and sometimes simply being there when someone needed a steady hand or a listening ear. The rain from earlier had left a slight mist on the windshield, and Mark turned on the wipers just enough to see clearly. The streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating patterns that made the night feel surreal, almost cinematic. As he watched the car ahead, he felt a mixture of curiosity and calm. This was a normal patrol, a normal night, or at least it was supposed to be. He adjusted his seat, kept a careful eye on the rearview mirror, and reminded himself to stay professional. Traffic stops were routine, but the people behind the wheels were not. Every person had a story, every face a reason for being on the road at that exact moment, and tonight, Mark's attention would not go unnoticed. He thought about how many times he had pulled over cars for speeding or minor traffic violations, how many times drivers had sighed, apologized, or argued. He had seen anger, frustration, fear, and relief, sometimes all in the same interaction. But tonight, even as he approached the car, he felt a quiet sense that this encounter would be different. The night air felt heavier, the city quieter, and his senses sharper than usual. He slowed his patrol car, keeping his distance, ready for the moment when he would make the routine decision to pull the driver over. What he didn't know was that this night, a simple choice would open the door to a story far greater than any ticket or warning, a story that would leave him forever changed. Mark took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel, and prepared for what he thought would be a standard traffic stop. It was just another night on the patrol, another chance to do his job, another routine drive through streets he knew like the back of his hand, but deep down, he had no idea that this night would become unforgettable. The car ahead began to slow slightly, as if sensing the presence of the patrol car behind it. Officer Mark eased his hand onto the steering wheel, keeping his eyes fixed on the vehicle. There was nothing overtly wrong yet, no flashing lights, no erratic driving, just a subtle hesitation in the way the car moved, like the driver was unaware of her surroundings or lost in thought. Mark knew this was often the moment where ordinary nights could turn into something unexpected. He flicked the siren lightly, a polite reminder for the driver to pull over, and the car responded almost immediately. Slowly, it moved to the side of the road, the brake lights glowing red in the misty streetlight. Mark followed, careful to maintain a safe distance, his heartbeat steady but alert. He had pulled over countless drivers before, but there was something about this car tonight that made him pay closer attention. The kind of subtle feeling that sometimes whispered, "This isn't just another routine stop." The vehicle came to a complete halt near a quiet stretch of road, the night enveloping them in its stillness. Mark switched off his siren, opened the patrol car window, and reached for the door handle. He stepped out, the familiar crunch of wet asphalt beneath his boots, the air heavy with the faint smell of rain and gasoline. There was a calmness to the night, almost too calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. As Mark approached the car, he noticed the driver, Emily, sitting behind the wheel, her hands resting lightly, almost nervously, on the steering wheel. The glow from the dashboard lit her face, revealing a mixture of curiosity and unease. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with eyes that seemed older than her years, carrying a story that hadn't yet been told. Mark cleared his throat, offering a polite but authoritative greeting. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I pulled you over?" Emily blinked, then shook her head slightly. There was no panic, no immediate defensiveness, just a quiet, almost contemplative silence. Mark studied her for a moment, noticing her posture, the slight tension in her shoulders. This was unusual, most drivers either apologized quickly or fumbled nervously with their documents. She seemed different, calm, yet aware, as if she understood something deeper about the moment she was in. "License and registration, please," Mark said, his voice steady, professional. Emily nodded and reached into her purse, pulling out a neatly folded wallet. Her movements were careful, deliberate, almost as if she were trying to steady herself, or perhaps steady him. When she handed over the documents, her hands were steady, her gaze direct, and Mark couldn't help but feel that there was a story waiting behind those eyes, a story that went beyond the routine of traffic stops, tickets, and warnings. He examined the documents briefly, glancing up to meet her eyes again. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" he asked, not in suspicion, but curiosity. Emily shook her head once more, her lips forming a faint, almost apologetic smile. Mark noticed the faint quiver in her expression, a subtle sign that she was carrying something heavy, something unspoken. Most drivers wouldn't show anything beyond nervousness at this point, but Emily's presence felt different, it demanded attention, understanding, even empathy. Mark leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice in a way that made the conversation feel personal rather than formal. "Sometimes, it's not always what you do wrong, but where you're at in life that catches my attention," he said quietly. Emily's eyes flickered with a hint of recognition, as if his words had touched a nerve she wasn't expecting to be addressed tonight. The night air was still, and the usual noises of the city, distant traffic, faint sirens, seemed to fade into the background. Then, with a soft motion, Emily rolled down her window completely. The sudden openness of the gesture, simple yet deliberate, felt like an invitation. The cool night air flowed into the car, carrying with it the faint scent of her perfume and something indefinable, a mixture of hope and vulnerability. Mark paused for a moment, struck by the small but significant act. There was a weight to the moment, a subtle but undeniable feeling that this interaction was about to go beyond the ordinary. For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other, the silence speaking volumes. Mark realized that in this quiet, ordinary street, something extraordinary was unfolding. A routine traffic stop, the kind he had performed hundreds of times, had transformed into a delicate, human connection. And neither of them would ever forget it. As Officer Mark stood by the patrol car, he couldn't help but notice Emily more closely. It wasn't just her calmness that drew his attention, but something deeper, an unspoken story behind her eyes, a weight that most people carried quietly but that somehow revealed itself in the smallest gestures. The way she held the steering wheel, her posture slightly tense yet composed, spoke volumes. Most drivers he pulled over were either flustered, apologetic, or defensive. Emily, however, was neither. She was different, and that difference immediately made the moment feel less ordinary. Mark cleared his throat again, trying to maintain the balance between professionalism and genuine curiosity. "Evening, ma'am. I hope everything's okay," he said, his tone softening slightly. Emily nodded, offering a polite smile, but her eyes remained thoughtful, distant even. It was clear she had something on her mind, something important. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she rested them on the steering wheel, a subtle sign that she was carrying more than just the usual stress of being pulled over. The streetlights reflected on her face, casting gentle shadows that seemed to highlight her intensity. Mark had seen plenty of people in his career, but there was something about her presence that felt like it demanded attention. Perhaps it was the way she seemed entirely present, yet somehow somewhere else at the same time. Most people tried to hide their emotions behind excuses or rehearsed words, but Emily's openness, subtle as it was, made the encounter feel intimate in a way that surprised him. Mark studied her for a moment, noting the small details, the faint line of worry between her eyebrows, the way her lips pressed together lightly, the careful but deliberate way she held herself. He realized that this wasn't just a nervous driver, this was a person with a story, a history, and perhaps even secrets that had shaped her life. And tonight, those secrets seemed poised to surface, though he didn't yet know what they would be. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Mark asked again, keeping his voice calm and neutral, as if encouraging her to share. Emily shook her head softly, her gaze flicking momentarily toward the dashboard, then back to him. The honesty in that gesture was striking. Most people would guess, lie, or offer a weak excuse, but she gave none of that. She simply let the moment breathe, letting him see a part of herself without words. Mark's mind wandered briefly as he thought about how many times he had made quick judgments about drivers, assuming he knew what was behind the wheel. Most of the time, it was routine, a ticket, a warning, or a short conversation, and then they went on their way. But Emily's presence didn't fit into any routine he knew. It was as if the very act of being pulled over had become a quiet invitation for a deeper connection. He could sense her nervous energy, the subtle way she shifted in her seat, almost imperceptibly. Yet there was also a strange strength about her, a resilience that wasn't obvious at first glance. It reminded him that appearances could be deceiving, that the quietest people often carried the heaviest burdens. And in that moment, Mark realized that this encounter could be far more than a traffic stop. The night was unusually quiet, with only the soft hum of the patrol car idling nearby. Even the distant sounds of the city seemed muted, as if the world had paused just to witness this small but significant interaction. Emily's calmness, mixed with a hint of tension, created a strange kind of electricity, an awareness that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Mark took a slow breath, grounding himself, and reminded himself to listen, not just to her words, but to the silence between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, Emily leaned slightly forward, her eyes meeting his more directly. There was a flicker of hesitation, a momentary pause that suggested she was weighing her words carefully. That tiny movement spoke more than she could have said aloud. It told Mark that this encounter was about to move beyond the ordinary, beyond the routine procedures of law enforcement. For the first time in what felt like years, Mark felt a mix of anticipation and curiosity rather than just duty. This wasn't about a ticket, a warning, or enforcing rules. It was about understanding, connection, and perhaps even a glimpse into the life of someone whose path had unexpectedly crossed with his own. And in that fleeting moment, he knew that nothing about this stop would be forgotten, that something profound was about to begin, something that would leave a lasting mark on both of their lives. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt heavier than any words could be. Officer Mark could see it in Emily's eyes, the hesitation, the unspoken story, the way her hands clutched the steering wheel just a little tighter. Most drivers, when pulled over, would either apologize quickly or explain a minor traffic mistake. But Emily, she seemed poised on the edge of something much bigger. Mark felt a strange sense of curiosity, mixed with caution. He had learned over the years that people revealed their truths in the quietest moments, when they felt safe enough to let someone in. And tonight, he had the feeling he was about to witness one of those moments. Then, softly, almost as if testing the waters, Emily began to speak. "Officer," she said, her voice low, hesitant, "I know this isn't what you expect, but I need to tell you something." Mark's brow furrowed slightly, but he stayed silent, giving her space. He had learned that sometimes listening was more important than speaking. People often needed to hear their own words aloud before they could make sense of them, and there was something in Emily's tone that made him believe this moment mattered. She took a deep breath, her hands still gripping the wheel. I've been running from something for a long time," she admitted, her eyes darting briefly to the streetlights above. "Not from the law, not from anyone else, but from myself." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm exterior she had maintained until now. Mark nodded slowly, encouraging her without saying a word. There was a weight to what she was about to reveal, and he could sense the courage it must have taken to even begin speaking. Emily's story unfolded slowly, like peeling back layers of a life that had been quietly hidden. She spoke of struggles no one could see, the loss of someone she loved, the pressure of responsibilities she had never asked for, the nights she had driven through the city trying to escape her thoughts. Her voice, though soft, carried an honesty that struck Mark deeply. He had pulled over thousands of drivers before, but never had a routine traffic stop turned into something so raw, so human, so revealing. As she spoke, Mark felt a mix of surprise and empathy. He realized that this was not about the violation he had initially suspected, not about speeding or distracted driving, but about someone reaching out, seeking understanding in the most unexpected place. Emily's words were careful, deliberate, yet full of emotion, and Mark could see the toll her experiences had taken on her. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of sadness and hope, and he instinctively understood that this moment, this brief intersection of their lives, was fragile and important. Mark listened without interruption, allowing her to speak freely. He noticed the way her hands relaxed slightly as the confession poured out, the tension easing bit by bit. There was a raw vulnerability to her honesty, a trust that few people would offer to a stranger, let alone a police officer. And in that vulnerability, Mark felt a profound shift. He realized that the role of an officer was not just about enforcing the law, it was about connecting with people, even in the briefest of encounters. Emily paused for a moment, gathering herself. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper, "but something about tonight, about being stopped, it made me feel like maybe someone would understand." Her words hung in the air, fragile and powerful at the same time. Mark nodded, his expression calm but compassionate. He wanted her to know that he did understand, even if only in a small way, that her story mattered, that she mattered. For the first time that evening, the patrol car, the streetlights, the quiet city, all of it seemed to fade into the background. There were no tickets, no warnings, no formalities, just two human beings sharing a moment that transcended routine, a moment where honesty replaced procedure, and understanding replaced judgment. Emily had opened her window, yes, but she had also opened her heart, and Mark knew that this was the point where a simple traffic stop became something extraordinary. When she finished, Mark remained silent for a few seconds, choosing his words carefully. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said finally, his voice steady, warm. It takes courage to speak your truth, especially when no one expects it. You're stronger than you realize. Emily's eyes softened, a faint smile forming as if a small weight had lifted. The tension in the air shifted, replaced by an unspoken connection, a shared understanding that neither of them would forget. In that moment, a routine night on patrol became a turning point. A simple pullover had transformed into a life-changing encounter, and Officer Mark knew that from now on, he would never look at a traffic stop the same way again. He had witnessed the power of honesty, vulnerability, and human connection, and he would carry this night with him forever. The air felt different now, heavier but in a way that was strangely comforting. Officer Mark had stood beside countless vehicles, pulled over countless drivers, yet nothing in his years on the road had prepared him for this. Emily's confession had left a mark, not just on the night, but on him, in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had expected a routine stop, a few minutes of paperwork, and then life would return to its predictable rhythm. Instead, he felt as though time itself had slowed, allowing him to witness something rare, a human soul opening in trust and vulnerability. Mark looked at Emily again, noticing details he hadn't before, the slight tilt of her head, the deep breaths she took as if to steady herself, the way her eyes glistened under the streetlights. There was a quiet strength there, born from hardship, but also a fragility that begged for acknowledgement. He realized that the small, seemingly insignificant moment of a traffic stop had transformed into a shared experience, one that carried weight far beyond the laws of the road. He leaned slightly closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Emily," he said, "what you just shared, it changes how I see this night, how I see my job, even how I see life sometimes." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and relief, as if finally someone truly understood the gravity of her words. Mark realized that in her openness, she had unknowingly given him a gift, a reminder that life was more than procedures and regulations, more than tickets and fines. Life was about connection, empathy, and recognizing the humanity in every person we meet. Emily's hands, once tense on the steering wheel, relaxed a little. She tilted her head, meeting his gaze more directly. There was a silent understanding between them, unspoken but powerful, as if both recognized that something significant had just occurred. In that brief moment, Mark felt a shift within himself, a deep, stirring awareness that this encounter would not fade into routine memory. This was not just another night on patrol, this was a moment that would stay with him for the rest of his career, perhaps even his life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of the patrol car engine, the distant sounds of traffic, even the faint breeze in the trees seemed to fade, leaving only the shared space between them. It was in that silence that Mark truly understood the impact of Emily's words. He realized that small acts of courage, like opening up to a stranger, speaking a truth, or simply being honest about one's struggles, could ripple far beyond what anyone might imagine. This was one of those rare instances where a brief encounter could alter the course of multiple lives, in ways both subtle and profound. Sometimes, Mark said slowly, it takes the smallest moments to teach the biggest lessons. A stop, a conversation, a shared story, it can remind us why we do what we do, and why we never take people for granted. Emily's lips curved into a faint smile, one that seemed to carry both relief and gratitude. She had come to the stop feeling weighed down by life's burdens, yet now there was a lightness in her expression, a sense that being heard, truly heard, had made a difference. Mark realized that this encounter had reminded him of his own vulnerabilities, his own unspoken challenges, and the many moments he had overlooked in his daily routine. Life, he thought, was full of these quiet intersections, brief pauses where two paths crossed and changed one another forever. It was a reminder that authority and rules, while important, were never as transformative as empathy, understanding, and genuine human connection. He took a deep breath, glancing at Emily one last time. "I hope tonight reminds you," he said, "that even in the hardest moments, someone can understand. Sometimes life gives us the courage to keep going when we least expect it." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the tension she carried now replaced with a subtle peace. In that moment, Mark felt the profound truth of what had just happened. a simple traffic stop, an ordinary night, had become extraordinary. As he returned to his patrol car, he glanced at Emily one last time, knowing that this encounter had changed both of them. It was a moment marked not by law, not by procedure, but by life itself. For Mark, this was no longer just another night on the streets, it was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest decisions, the briefest acts of listening, could change lives forever. And in that quiet, transformative pause, he felt the world had shifted, ever so slightly, for both of them. The night air felt lighter now, as if the tension that had hovered over the quiet street was slowly lifting. Officer Mark stepped closer to the patrol car, glancing at Emily with a calm, steady gaze. He could still feel the echo of her confession, the weight of her words, and the courage it must have taken for her to speak them aloud. Most drivers he pulled over would never reveal such personal struggles, and yet here she was, sharing her life in a way that left him both humbled and inspired. He realized that what mattered now wasn't issuing a ticket or following routine, it was offering compassion, understanding, and a simple human connection. Mark spoke softly, careful not to break the fragile trust that had formed in the few minutes of their encounter. "Emily," he said, "I want you to know something. You don't have to carry everything on your own. Sometimes, just sharing your story can make all the difference." He paused, letting the words settle, hoping they would offer the reassurance she clearly needed. Emily's hands, which had been tense on the steering wheel, relaxed slightly, and she allowed herself a faint nod. There was a moment of silent acknowledgement, a recognition that in the midst of ordinary procedures, something extraordinary had unfolded. Instead of pulling out his ticket book, Mark chose a different approach. He offered her advice, gentle encouragement, and guidance for steps she could take to help herself, both practically and emotionally. "Life can be overwhelming," he said, "and sometimes we all need a reminder that someone cares. You're stronger than you realize, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Emily listened intently, her eyes glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. It was clear that his words resonated with her, that this simple act of kindness had begun to lift some of the weight she carried. Mark also shared a small piece of himself, a personal story that reflected his own struggles and moments of doubt. He spoke not as an officer enforcing the law, but as a human being, someone who had faced challenges and found strength in unexpected places. Emily leaned slightly forward, her gaze focused, as if every word was a lifeline. The patrol car, the empty street, and the distant sounds of the city faded into the background, leaving only the shared space between them, a space filled with empathy, understanding, and the quiet power of human connection. He encouraged her to take small steps, to find support in the people around her, and to remember that every day offered the possibility of change, no matter how difficult the past had been. His words were not formal advice, but heartfelt guidance, the kind that comes from lived experience and genuine care. Emily's expression softened, a faint smile forming that suggested relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of hope. She had arrived at this traffic stop weighed down by fear and uncertainty, yet now there was a lightness in her demeanor, a small but powerful shift in her perspective. Mark could see the ripple effect of this small act of compassion. It wasn't about bending rules or ignoring responsibility, it was about recognizing the humanity behind the wheel, about understanding that sometimes the law could coexist with empathy. He realized that the smallest gestures, the quiet words of reassurance, could transform someone's life far more than a ticket ever could. Emily's reaction was proof of that truth. Before leaving, Mark offered a few practical suggestions, numbers to call, places to seek guidance, and simple steps to regain control over the overwhelming parts of life. Emily listened, committed to remembering every word, every gesture, every moment of genuine human care she had received. For Mark, the encounter was a reminder of why he had chosen this career, to serve not just with authority, but with heart, to make a difference in ways that went beyond rules, procedures, and enforcement. Finally, he smiled gently and said, "Tonight wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about listening, understanding, and being there for someone when it matters most. You've taken a brave step tonight, and I hope you carry that courage forward." Emily's eyes glistened, and she nodded slowly, a sense of gratitude and hope washing over her. It was clear that this brief moment of compassion would resonate in her life long after the patrol car drove away. Mark returned to his vehicle, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. The night, once routine, had become extraordinary. He realized that the world often demanded small acts of courage and kindness, and tonight, both he and Emily had experienced that truth. A routine traffic stop had turned into a lesson in humanity, a testament to the transformative power of compassion, and a reminder that sometimes, the simplest gestures can change lives forever. As Officer Mark drove away, the hum of the patrol car felt different than usual. The city lights streaked past, but he didn't see them the same way he normally did. Something had shifted inside him, something subtle yet profound. A routine night had turned into an extraordinary moment, and he could still feel the echo of Emily's words and the quiet connection they had shared. Even as he continued his patrol, scanning the streets for other drivers and small disturbances, his mind lingered on the encounter. That simple pullover, that brief moment of human honesty, had created a ripple that he knew would extend far beyond the street they had just occupied. Meanwhile, Emily remained in her car for a few moments longer, letting the quiet settle over her. Her heart was still pounding, but it was no longer with the fear or tension that had gripped her earlier. Instead, it was a mixture of relief and clarity. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she felt lighter. Sharing her story with someone who listened without judgment, someone who responded not with authority but with understanding, had an unexpected effect. It was as if a weight she had carried alone had been partially lifted. And in that quiet moment, she realized that courage could arrive in small, unexpected ways: a kind word, a listening ear, a simple act of kindness from a stranger who understood. The ripple effect of that night did not stop with Emily. Officer Mark found himself thinking about her story long after the patrol ended. During his next encounters, he noticed himself being more patient, more attentive, and more willing to truly listen to the people he met. He understood that a simple conversation could hold far more meaning than any ticket or reprimand. A few kind words could inspire hope, ease a burden, or even change the direction of someone's life. That realization stayed with him, a reminder that policing was not just about enforcing rules, it was about connecting with humanity in moments that mattered. Days later, Emily recounted the experience to a close friend. The story of a simple traffic stop that turned into a transformative moment spread quietly among her circle, inspiring conversations about empathy, courage, and human connection. It reminded her friends that even small acts could ripple outward, touching others in ways that were impossible to measure. What had started as an ordinary night had become something extraordinary, demonstrating that life often surprises us with moments that carry far-reaching consequences. Mark, too, experienced the ripple in unexpected ways. At work, he found himself approaching situations differently. He noticed a young man on the street who seemed nervous and scared, a woman struggling to manage her children in a chaotic moment, a man whose anger masked deeper struggles. Each interaction reminded him of Emily and the lesson she had unknowingly taught him, that compassion could transform lives, sometimes more profoundly than discipline ever could. The memory of that night became a compass, guiding his actions, informing his choices, and reminding him that even brief encounters could create lasting change. For Emily, the ripple effect continued as she began to take steps she had once thought impossible. She reached out for support, spoke honestly with loved ones, and began to see life through a lens of possibility rather than despair. The encouragement she had received from a stranger, a police officer who had chosen empathy over procedure, sparked a chain of confidence and hope within her. Every small decision she made thereafter, every attempt to face her challenges with courage, traced back to that one night. And Mark, too, carried the ripple forward in ways that would remain invisible to most. The conversations he had, the subtle acts of kindness he performed, the patience he exercised, they were all influenced by the encounter. A single moment of trust and honesty had cascaded into countless decisions, each small but significant, each an echo of that night when humanity transcended routine. The world, often overwhelming and fast-paced, rarely gives people reminders of their shared humanity. Yet, in this quiet intersection of two lives, it had done exactly that. The ripples from that evening stretched outward, connecting both Emily and Mark to the world around them in ways neither could have predicted. What had begun as a routine traffic stop had become a lasting lesson, that empathy, compassion, and human connection can travel farther than any words or actions alone. And in that truth, both of them carried a sense of purpose. Emily with renewed hope for her future, Mark with renewed meaning in his work. The ripple effect, unseen yet undeniable, had transformed more than a single night, it had transformed lives. Days turned into weeks, yet Officer Mark could not stop thinking about that night. The routine patrol, the hesitant car, Emily's confession, and the quiet connection they had shared replayed in his mind like a scene that refused to fade. In his years on the force, he had experienced countless stops, countless encounters, and countless moments of fleeting interaction. Yet none had lingered like this one. It was different. It wasn't just the story she had shared, it was the humanity behind it, the vulnerability, the trust, and the profound reminder that every life mattered, even in moments that seemed ordinary on the surface. Mark found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned that night. For him, it wasn't about issuing tickets, enforcing rules, or checking off a duty list. It was about seeing the person behind the wheel, listening to the human being behind the license and registration, and remembering that empathy could sometimes change lives in ways no law could. He realized that policing, at its heart, was not only about protection but also about connection. One small act of kindness could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that were impossible to measure, and he had witnessed that firsthand. The encounter had left its mark on Emily as well. That night had become a turning point, a quiet pivot in her life that she would never forget. She had gone into the traffic stop burdened with fear, anxiety, and doubt, yet she left with a sense of relief, hope, and renewed purpose. Emily had felt heard, understood, and valued, and the lessons she carried from that night shaped her decisions in the weeks, months, and even years to come. She found herself approaching challenges differently, reaching out to loved ones more openly, and embracing moments of courage that she might have once avoided. Mark often thought about the ripple effect, how a single moment had expanded beyond the street where it happened. He remembered the subtle details, the glimmer of hope in Emily's eyes, the slight tension in her hands, the way the night seemed to pause for them. Those memories became more than just recollections, they became guiding principles. They reminded him to look deeper, to listen more carefully, and to never underestimate the power of a simple, compassionate interaction. In the months that followed, he carried that lesson into every traffic stop, every encounter, every conversation. The city around him continued to move at its usual pace, but he saw it differently now. He noticed the quiet struggles of everyday people, the young man with too many worries, the parent juggling chaos and responsibilities, the elderly woman navigating a crowded street. He saw the human stories hidden in the routines, and he responded with patience, understanding, and care. In many ways, Emily's courage had inspired him to become a better officer, not just by the book, but in heart and action. Sometimes, he wondered if Emily ever realized the full impact of their encounter. He hoped she did because it had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It reminded him that the world was full of small, quiet moments where people had the chance to touch each other's lives profoundly, and often without even knowing it. A kind word, a listening ear, or a compassionate response could be enough to spark change, to inspire courage, to remind someone that they were not alone. Years later, Mark would tell the story to younger officers as part of his training, not to boast, but to teach a principle often overlooked, that policing is as much about humanity as it is about law. It's easy to focus on rules and regulations, he would say, but never forget the person behind the wheel. Sometimes, your empathy can be far more powerful than your authority. For Emily, that night remained a quiet landmark in her life. Every time she faced a challenge, she remembered the officer who had stopped her, not to punish, but to listen. She remembered the courage it took to speak, and the relief of being heard. That one moment became a beacon, a reminder that life could change in an instant, sometimes for the better, sometimes in ways you never expected, but always in ways that mattered. In the end, the traffic stop became more than a routine police encounter. It became a legacy of human connection. It proved that even in a world governed by rules, the heart could transcend the ordinary. It demonstrated that courage, honesty, and compassion could ripple through lives, leaving lasting impressions that neither time nor distance could erase. For Officer Mark and Emily, the night remained a quiet testament to the power of empathy, a story of transformation, and a reminder that sometimes, the simplest moments carry the greatest meaning.